I tell you over and over again that I'm not a fucking expert. I'm a fucking asshole. And I was wrong about the ketogenic diet. All right, now that I got everybody that watches, just reads a description and like watches the first 10 seconds of a video to click dislike and move on and put a shitty comment in underneath. Now let's get down to the rest of the video where you actually get to hear what I have to say and you were patient enough to listen to the entire video before you wrote shit down. Just saying. So there was something that I have gone over in the past about the ketogenic diet and glycogen. And as I've researched a little more into like basically fitness, the fitness side, the more performance-based side, and there's no one better to do this than Jeff Volek, who, and of course Timothy Noakes, both of whom studied physiology and the on the nutritional side of things and have studied military. Mainly Jeff Volek has done this. And Stephen Finney, too, I believe is involved. They've studied athletes, they've studied obese, they've studied diabetes, they've studied cancer, they've studied the military. And I do find it kind of hypocritical that the government is trying to explore a ketogenic diet in terms of its military population, which is suffering from the same obesity that the rest of us are, and to the fact that 73% or something of young adults that are of that military recruiting age can't pass the fucking fitness test because they're overweight or obese, and they can't get within tolerance to join the military. So we're running into a shortage of soldiers, not to mention that soldier performance in extreme conditions is hampered by nutrition. And now the military is working very closely, it seems, with Jeff Volek to do experiments on soldiers to see how they perform and if the ketogenic diet is willing to do so. But we're not really exploring the applications to civilians and our nutrition guidelines, are we? I wonder why that is. You ever wonder when something's fucked up, why it's fucked up? That's fucked up. It's good enough for our soldiers. It's good enough for the kids in school. It's good enough for your college students. It's good enough for your average working motherfucker that's out in the world. But no, because profit is more important on the side of public health. But the military, that's another story. They need to be able to do their job. So you don't need to be able to do your job, but the military does. And as somebody who got pretty much retired early, it was an honorable discharge and everything. I just higher tenured out because I couldn't get promoted because I was obese. I arguably would have went 20 years in my military career if I would not have become too fat to be in the military. I got higher tenured out because I wasn't able to get promoted to staff sergeant because I was pretty obese at the time. I was like 240-ish at the time. It was the beginning, and it just continued every year. I'd pack on more and more poundage until it started to affect my trucking career. And, you have to have a certain physical standard in trucking. Now, you wouldn't believe that if you look around the trucking industry. But believe it or not, when you start to have diabetic issues and blood sugar control issues, they take that fairly seriously. And what do they want you to do? They want you to medicate in order to trucking. They want you to get control of your blood sugar before you're driving 80,000 pounds of vehicle down the road. Fair enough. There's better ways to go about it than through pharmaceutical industry, but what can I say? That's the world we fucking live in today. So I've been looking into, because I want to perform better. I want to know that I'm not spinning my wheels when I am picking shit up and putting shit down and picking shit up, putting shit down, which I'm about to go do here in a couple hours. That's why I'm all ready to go so I can look at my gains, a little bit of gains in the mirror. And I am making progress there. My recovery's better. I'm starting to put on more weight and push myself a little more, and trying to keep the lessons I'm learning about form intact, and I feel like I am making strength and endurance progress. I made it through a 14-minute interval yesterday, and normally I would probably give up after like 10 or 11 minutes. It's kind of, I don't know, it's a slow process. Now, one of the things that I've gone over repeatedly in the past about the ketogenic diet is glycogen, and the whole science that you can't perform at peak performance on a ketogenic diet because you don't have enough glycogen to get the job done. And I basically have been operating under the theory that, and it isn't a theory, it's actually proven. This is hard science that proved this. But it was over a 4-week period that they did this science, and I believe it was done by Stephen Finney, you generally have about 50% muscle glycogen when you're on a ketogenic diet. Well, it turns out that if you were a long-term, didn't cheat, fucking 100% fat-adapted, well-formulated ketogenic diet athlete, and that's a lot, there's a lot in that. Well-formulated means you're not fucking up in what you're eating that is within the ketogenic diet. That over time, of the course of 20 months, you return to full glycogen storage. And on top of that, you actually refill your glycogen without eating any carbs. And you do so in the same amount of time it takes a carb-burning motherfucker to do so. Part of long-term keto-adaptation is you preserve glycogen stores to basically be able to do that high intensity push on as far as your muscles go. And that was like very surprising to me when I was watching this. So I want to share a little bit of it with you. Now, the videos I'm referencing here, I'm not going to play the whole fucking thing, but by all means, you should check the link below and watch the entire presentations. I'm going to go over some stuff with Jeff Volek here, and I'm also going to go over some stuff with Tim Noakes, and we're going to get to a point where some of the conventional dogmas that I want to explain that are still out there today, and I'm still finding this in the fitness community. Now, granted, out of necessity, personal trainers are starting to acknowledge keto and at the very least put up with it. But I'm still getting a lot of the same dogma. You can't do it without carbs. You got to eat carbs. You got to carb load. You got to gel. You got to do all of this shit. And, and you talk to athletes that have been doing this for fucking 20 years, and that's their defined fucking protocol for these activities. And, who might argue, I don't like picking shit up and putting shit down and running long distance and doing all of that shit, so I can't argue with you. You, obviously, this is how you did it, and this is the best way to do it. But I'm somebody who just can't accept dogma anymore. Like, I question every established dogma at this point, just based on the shit I've uncovered in my journey and in my research and in the things I've tested out on myself that just were surprising as fuck to me. So whenever something sticks up and says, hey, dickhead, everybody's fucking wrong, this is the right thing to do, I kind of give it a good serious consideration and even test it out at some point. So let's start listening to some Jeff Volek and shit and see how we go here.
So fatty acids and ketones become the primary fuel. And this is very tightly linked to carbohydrate. In fact, it's a relatively linear relationship. This is data from a controlled feeding study where we incrementally, well, we started out on a ketogenic diet and then incrementally added carbohydrate back in the same people in 3-week intervals. And you can see this is respiratory exchange ratio. As you go on the ketogenic diet, you decrease that.
Now, I found this slide particularly interesting. Because it's essentially what you can do to determine your carb tolerance. And this was done in a controlled feeding study, which means they controlled all the food intake of their subjects with metabolic syndrome. And they also had them doing exercise as part of this. And began increasing carbohydrates. And you could see that they were burning fat, and this is what this is indicated for in this area here. They were burning fat all the way up to like 100-ish grams. You know, it's questionable in this area here. So right around here, I would say, is a good threshold. That's at like 10 weeks. Or 12 weeks that they increased up to the 100 grams. So this suggests that you can still remain in a fair amount of ketosis up to 100 grams of carbohydrate. But I do believe that exercise is an important role in allowing you to have a higher carbohydrate intake threshold. Now this is the important part right here. And this is what really jumps out at me. So listen carefully to this part, because this is what kind of this new study, the FASTER study, has pretty much said that everything that I believed before about performance and athletics and muscle glycogen and all of that about the ketogenic diet is essentially wrong, and you can perform at the same level as a fucking carb burner on the ketogenic diet. I didn't think it was possible, but the caveat to this is you have to be on a well-formulated, strict ketogenic diet for a long period of time to achieve this level of performance. So you have to have your diet dialed in. You can't be fucking around. You can't be having cheat days. You can't be drinking your face off all the time. There's a whole lot of things that they controlled for to make this happen. And you need to kind of take that into account. You know, that you're probably eating some dirty-ass keto and expecting to perform well in your athletic performance. That's just not the case, all right? So that's the caveat. But bottom line, long-term keto adaptation, which is only possible if your ketogenic diet's right on point and you don't fuck up. This is... this blew my mind when he's just as excited about it as I am. When I was watching this, I just was like, yes, I don't have to try and carb load to build muscle, to build endurance, to perform well out on the trail. I can remain on a ketogenic diet, and as long as I don't fuck that up, which I'm working on by not drinking alcohol anymore, and I'm mostly carnivore as it is, and I'm really strict on a lot of the foods that I'm doing now, that I can essentially perform this way. Now, they're not as carnivore as I am, so there's that variable in terms of my personal performance, but this is good shit to know, and these elite athletes are really clinging to the ketogenic diet with tremendous performance increases, especially in terms of endurance. But it turns out it's not as easy to get to the high performance as far as intensity and strength go until you've really stuck to the diet for a long period of time.
Actually validated what Steve showed over 30 years ago, that peak fat oxidation in these low-carb athletes was literally twofold higher. And again, the highest rates we previously thought were possible was about 1 gram per minute. So you see the high-carb athletes there, they're really good fat burners. These are lean, healthy, high-carb endurance athletes. But switching diet has a dramatic impact even in these elite athletes. What I think is really fascinating, perhaps almost unbelievable, is that despite not eating very much carbohydrate, these elite athletes had normal glycogen levels or similar glycogen levels to their high carb counterparts, and actually showed depletion in response to 3 hours of exercise. And despite not eating any carbohydrates during 2 hours of recovery, resynthesized glycogen at the same rate.
Did you hear that? Same rate of resynthesizing the muscle glycogen in a low carb and high carb group. That's fucking amazing. Now, this is 20 months on a ketogenic diet. That's a long time for a lot of people. You know, some people don't even last fucking 4 weeks. So, long-term ketogenic diet, you can perform as well as a carb burner because you have the muscle glycogen available. And you get the added benefit if you're an endurance athlete of being bonk proof. Now, why are you bonk proof? That's bonk is when you just hit that level of exhaustion because you're not getting enough glucose to your brain. And we're going to get into this a little bit with Tim Noakes in his side because he was the motherfucker that invented the gel. You know, he was one of the founders of the lore of running and all of this carb loading bullshit, and he has since reversed his position after becoming diabetic. He was a marathon runner. He was teaching marathon runners how to be marathon runners. He was a scientist doing all of this various experiments to prove the carbohydrate theory while ignoring the fat theory, and there's a really good talk by him that just came out post-trial that, because he's releasing a new book, The Lore of Nutrition, which goes over the trial and goes over a lot of these things and the whole story on how he ended up being essentially ostracized by the food industry in South Africa and just basically, his whole thing. And it's mind-blowing, the pushback of the food industries and the fitness industries on this particular topic. Because if you think about the amount of products that are marketed to people, and there's some gyms I go into and they got this big fucking supplement store right in the fucking gym, along with energy drinks and Gatorade and all this other bullshit. Also, you can carb load. But the problem is if you're a carb loader, you have to do that. If you're a carb burner and you're not fat adapted, you have to gel or you could pass the fuck out because your fucking blood sugar drops. But if you're a ketogenic motherfucker and you're highly fat adapted, and it does take 6 to 8 weeks to get at least the initial adaptation done, but a lot longer to get to this level to where you have the same full glycogen stores as a carb burner and you replenish them just as quickly. But the difference is if you're a ketogenic motherfucker, you are not going to bonk because as your blood glucose drops, your brain is able to utilize ketones to fill in that gap. The reason you bonk is there's not enough liver glycogen to fuel your brain. And if you are not adapted to burning fat in your brain, you bonk. You fall the fuck out and you have to carb up. So what this is essentially saying is you don't have to fucking carb load if you stick to a strict ketogenic diet and you adapt long term. And for athletes, it is a hell of a lot longer than 6 weeks. At the 4-week mark, you've got maybe 52% glycogen stores. They did biopsies. This is heavily measured. They put isotopes and shit to figure out where energy was coming from, and all. They did all the science necessary to figure this shit out. And it's very exciting to know that essentially, even though you don't eat carbohydrates, and this is like a nail in the coffin that you have to have carbs in your life. You can eat no carbohydrate, and if you go by this shit, you'll essentially be normally functioning from a physical standpoint. And you will be higher functioning from a brain standpoint. Why? Because your brain is able to burn ketones instead of glucose to fuel itself. And not entirely, you still require a little bit of glucose, but to know that, your recovery time and refilling muscle glycogen without anything. Now, liver, I don't know, because, that's the one part you didn't really get into is the liver glycogen aspect of it. Does your liver become full? And I would think if your liver was full of glycogen that somehow you would be triggered out of ketosis and start fueling on glucose, but we really need to clear that up. Like if I was able to raise my hand in the audience and I would, be like, look, that's all well and great for muscle glycogen because only your muscle can use that glycogen. What about the liver glycogen? How does that work? So I'm curious about that. And if any of you have found any results on that issue over the FASTER study, by all means, post it below. But, the fact that we can fuel athletic performance and the same as a carb burner with no loss in performance is it's a very astonishing study that they did that is able to prove this. And I am really, if you want to keep up with the latest on science on the ketogenic diet, I would follow Jeff Volek's work, and Stephen Finney, obviously, because they're both part of the Verter Health shit, and they're doing real science to back up what they say. Is it flawless? They do have their own biases. Like Finney has repeatedly taken his shit on fasting, and we're going to do a video at some point on that. But, this is compelling shit right here. And nobody else seems to give a shit, except the military. Your government, the FDA, they don't give no fucks about this science. They're not even looking at it. They just put together their new food guidelines panel, and it's mostly the same fucking biased fucking food shill vegan motherfuckers that were on there before. And we're not represented as ketos in that nutrition panel, and the science isn't represented. It's all plant-based fucking Harvard-sponsored bullshit by Walter Willett and shit. Wouldn't be surprised if he was on the fucking panel.
Just fascinating, and I'll come back to this a little later and show you some newer glycogen data we have, but it just shows you how adept the body is at preserving glycogen and scavenging any carbon molecules that can be converted to glycogen when you're not eating a lot of carbohydrate. Now in a sport,
and that happens through gluconeogenesis. So, just keep that in mind, that your liver is able to resupply your muscle glycogen. So it stands to reason that at that level you won't be flat anymore. A lot of people are like, oh, I lost all my glycogen. You'll put on water weight, obviously, too, over time. Over the 20 weeks, your water weight will return to a more normal level. You're storing more electrolytes. You got all of this shit going on. That, a lot of people might look at it as, oh, I regained some weight on the ketogenic diet. Well, maybe you just returned your muscle glycogen to its pre-adaptation levels, And the other interesting part of that is people who think that they can carb load on a ketogenic diet and not create fat. If you've been on a ketogenic diet and you go out and carb load and your muscle glycogen's already full, then you're just going to fill up your liver, which is about maybe 900 calories of glycogen in your liver. And then after that, you're going to make fat. And, so a lot of people think, oh, I got 2,000 calories of glycogen on my body. I can eat a shit ton of carbs, as long as I work out. Nope. Because very quickly, your liver will take care of it if you're fat adapted. And if you think you're just going to have carb cheat days, not only are you not fat adapting properly, but you even at 4 weeks, you're maintaining a 52% glycogen storage in your muscles. So you'll probably maybe throw 1,200, 1,500 calories into your glycogen. But then after that, you're making fat. Not to mention you're kicking yourself out of ketosis and requiring to use glucose for energy instead of ketones, and then it takes a few days, up to a week sometimes, to get back into nutritional ketosis without a significant fasting period. So,
fat, that's the way we store energy. In fact, we have a very limited capacity to store carbohydrate. If you could extract all the glucose out of your body, you've got maybe 2,000 kilocalories. most of that in muscle glycogen, a little bit in liver glycogen. The amount circulating in the blood is really small. But compare that to how much fat you can store. Adipocytes.
And this is the other advantage of being a fat-adapted athlete. Even at normal body weight, you're carrying around 25,000 calories. You know? And you're able to get direct access to it. And because your brain is adapted to using ketones, when you use up that glycogen that you have, when you're fat adapted, properly, fully fat adapted athlete, you got free access to the energy you need for your muscles to keep working. You're probably going to lose that burst strength just like you would as a carb burner. Once you deplete that glycogen, your strength your performance will drop, but your endurance will keep going on trucking as a fat burner, or as a carb burner, you're going to have to take in glucose to keep everything flowing. And there's been tremendous, endurance athletes that have broken records now by being fat-adapted ketogenic athletes. And that's the reason, it's their brain is protected from bonking, and they have unlimited energy, virtually unlimited energy. I think one of the things I heard in this research is that you can essentially run for 10 days before you run out of energy. If you're a fat-adapted athlete, versus 3 hours if you're a carb burner, until you have to take in more calories. And then you got people shitting themselves and doing all kinds of crap out there while they're running and biking and shit. And that ain't good either.
Exercising or slow down to refuel. But that's what the standard recommendations are for endurance athletes, is to fuel every 15, 30 minutes with some form of glucose to maintain high carbohydrate oxidation rates. But when you're keto adapted, and this is data from the FASTER study, these were athletes running on a treadmill for 3 hours. You see the keto adapted athletes are burning almost 90% fat. That's primarily coming from their adipose tissue. So they're they're carrying food, it's just in their adipose tissue, as opposed to carrying it in gel packs and other sources of carbohydrate fuel.
So there's another big advantage right there. You don't have to gel. In fact, Tim Noakes tells a story of a guy who was running the length of the Great Wall of China, and he ran out of food. And he started to feel like shit after basically around the time that he started to deplete his fat store, because he wasn't fat to begin with. But you think about, you're running the length of that, you're gonna burn through that 25,000 calories of the normal weight motherfucker pretty quick. And he started to get exhausted and run down. And instead of gelling, he started eating pig fat. The Mongolians said, "Here's some pig fat. Eat this. You'll be fine." And they didn't know any science shit. They were like, "Hey, this is what we do. When we gotta keep going and we feel like shit, here's some pig fat." He ate pig fat and finished and did just fine. So these are two different metabolisms going here. Which would you pick? I'd pick the one over here. Not only am I burning off all of that fat that most people are trying to burn off when they go to the gym, but I'm pretty much at peak performance here as far as endurance goes, which means you can go longer and go further over time, and without having to carry around gels and eat and refuel while you're still exercising. And this has tremendous implications for me as a hiker, because this means that I don't need to necessarily fuel my hikes. I just need to make sure I'm well fat adapted when I'm out there, because I'm essentially, and I can tell you, I'm carrying more fat than a lot of these athletes are. I have all the food I need with me. I just need to make sure my electrolytes and hydration's on point. And I should be able to theoretically, unless I fucked up my ketogenic approach, to be in this area on this side while I'm hiking, which is very physically strenuous. And, what I was running into, and it might just be because I'm not, well formulated in my ketogenic diet. I might not be as ketogenic as I should be, after 4 years. And I think the alcohol played a big role. So I'm really interested to see how I perform this year once I'm out there, in terms of, how I feel the next day after I do these fasted hikes, and how much I need to refuel and rebuild. But I think part of that is also the damage you do. You need to take the proteins and fats in to give yourself building blocks to repair the damage you're doing on these strenuous physical activities. So I think that is more of a factor on why I have to fuel my hikes instead of doing them fasted and then fasting and then going fasting my way out. I do believe protein is pretty much a required feeding period, and maybe that's why, I don't know, that I don't know if he had some pig protein with his shit, but I think an argument could be made that in this situation over here, you have to use fat and protein for, at the very least, to give yourself the building blocks to refuel. Sorry, I forgot to turn my fucking phone off again. To give yourself the building blocks to refuel those various systems that you are tearing down when you exercise. So
physiology behind that newfound neural protection. I just want to mention, though, while the brain takes up ketones readily, so does the heart. So this is data from our cancer trial. Actually, we're studying women with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, and this is looking at glucose radiotracer using fluoro 18. So the dark areas there are areas that are taking up glucose at a higher rate. And this is a woman that was 3 months on a ketogenic diet, and it's a little off topic, but you'll notice there's a lot of her liver metastases go down dramatically.
So looking here, I mean, your heart can be entirely fueled by ketones. That means that as far as endurance athletes go, and now this wasn't even an athlete, that your heart can be fit and not require fuel, and you won't have a heart attack or a grabber while you're running. This is some very strong data here on essentially no glucose. After 3 months on a ketogenic diet, the heart is entirely fueled by ketones, more so than the brain. Brain still has a lot of glucose use. Heart, not so much. So there's that. It's pretty profound, I think. So here's the other slides that and this is another important part of this talk in regards to athletic performance, and not even just athletic performance. Knowing this about how your body works tells you a lot about how the ketogenic diet could very well be the way we're supposed to be eating. In terms of the foods. Now, the problem is our food environment is a pile of shit. That's one of the reasons carnivores gaining ground, is not because vegetables are necessarily 100% bad for you, but what we do to those vegetables and how we have destroyed our ability to cope with a lot of the natural vegetables that we do eat. I believe our lifestyle up till now has made us less tolerant to natural plant defenses. Not to mention that the glyphosate problem is completely destroying our tolerance for lectins and oxalates and all of these other natural plant problems that are getting into our bloodstream and wreaking havoc on us. And I'm not seeing a lot of data of people being able to recover from this. I see a lot of data where people go carnivore and stay carnivore, and they get the autoimmune relief that they're looking for and the depression relief that they're looking for. But anytime they go back, they end up dealing with this thing. But understanding that this pretty much can go towards how we're supposed to be eating. What we are designed to eat. The fact that the body does what we're about to go over here is a very astounding discovery on the ketogenic diet, in my opinion, because it essentially says you will, over time, once you adapt, operate at the same exact way that you did before, but better in a lot of respects in terms of utilizing your stored energy, in terms of your hormones normalizing, in terms of your better cognitive function. There's just so many things that are better than being a carb burner. And I believe the reason why is our system works pretty efficiently as a ketogenic, as you adapt and become a fat burner. As you achieve fat adaptation, you operate way more efficiently than you do as a carb burner, which leads me to believe that this is the way we're supposed to function. You do not need to eat carbohydrates to have glucose in your body, period. This is the nail in the coffin. The fact that a long-term fat adaptation allows you to produce all the glucose you need for performance, for day-to-day life, for proper health and functioning. This right here tells you, look, you don't need to eat all these carbs. It's bullshit. If you can't get the meat and fat you need and your food environment is such that you can't survive because you don't have access to the food on a ketogenic diet that you need, then the fallback plan is obviously the next best solution to not starve to death, and that's carbohydrates. And I believe that's, if you look back throughout our ancestry prior to agriculture, hunter-gatherers, they ate whatever they could find. So if they didn't get a good hunt, they went out and gathered. If they couldn't gather, they went out and hunt. They fished. They did whatever they could to get the calories in that they need, because surviving and being a hunter-gatherer is a very physically intense. You are essentially an athlete if you're a hunter-gatherer, because you are very physical in almost everything you do. If you watch like Naked and Afraid and these kinds of things, and the things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis, regularly, all day sometimes, and I can tell you from my experience that maintaining a fire all day because it's fucking cold out is a very physically laborious job. You're going out, you're carrying heavy-ass fucking logs up the hill, then you're cutting them and, sawing them in half, and then stacking them, and then you're hiking, you're carrying, you're lifting, you're pushing, you're pulling, you're picking shit up and putting shit down. It sucks, to the point where the only rest I got was when I crawled into my sleeping bag and stayed warm that way, so I didn't have to spend all of these calories building a fire. And when you're fasting, you have to think about that, especially in the wilderness. Not that I was really taking a big risk, because I still had plenty of calories on board, but I did lose a pound a day during my wilderness fast. Because I wasn't taking in the energy I was expending. So this is just more evidence in my book that a ketogenic diet is the right thing to do. So let's give a listen to what he says here.
And we just finished analyzing glycogen, and we just did resting glycogen levels, but they were only 14% lower than the high carbohydrate group at rest. And Finney, these are the only 3 studies
I had it wrong. It was 1 month for Finney's studies. This is where I originally got that you got about 50% of your glycogen, even though you're ketogenic. Turns out that they did this for the ROTC candidates here, and they were only 14% lower. And that's the military experiments that they're doing. And then they did the faster study with ultra runners, and they're at 2%. Now, the question is, does this only happen if you're that athletic? Do you have to do exercise to get this? That question's kind of not made clear, because these are all very physically active people here. But it does say, if you're physically active, essentially, and you fat adapt, you will get the glycogen you need.
aware of that have measured muscle glycogen in humans adapted to a ketogenic diet. And Finney showed in his excellent study back in '83 almost
and the sad thing is we've known some of this since the 80s. Didn't fucking change things much, did it?
Glycogen was cut almost in half in these elite cyclists, but that was only 4 weeks. Our study was closer to 3 months. We show there's some adaptation here to preserve glycogen. And in those faster athletes, which I showed you earlier, they had a complete preservation of glycogen. So this shows you potentially this temporal adaptation in restoring glycogen levels that takes more than a couple weeks, more than a couple months probably to fully optimize. And this is one of the subjects from the keto diet arm of that ROTC study, tank study we called it, who was actually one of the leaders of the cadre there, who had just an amazing response. He was.
So for all of those, like, snake diet motherfuckers that are like, the ketogenic diet is catabolic as fuck. Science and shit. Hard science. Measured the shit. And they did it with fucking expensive ass MRIs and fucking isotopes and all this other fucking shit. And look at this. 10 weeks, ketogenic diet. Lost weight, 22 pounds. Fat mass. It was almost all fat. Gained a pound of lean mass. Now, they're physically active during this. So if you think a ketogenic diet's going to steal all your gains, not only are you wrong on the performance side, but you actually build a little bit of lean mass over a 10-week period. And I can tell you it's a long process building muscle. And one could argue you could probably build a little more lean mass in this, but at the very least, you're not losing mass on a ketogenic diet at all. You are still gaining lean mass. And they measure it scientifically, all right, with MRIs and ultrasounds, and they inject dyes into shit to figure out where your energy's coming from and where it goes. And, there's all kinds of things that they're doing to check this stuff. They do muscle glycogen biopsies. This is hard science here. This isn't epidemiology, all right? Which I'm so fucking sick of. This is associated with that bullshit science that is trumpeted out in the fucking headlines every fucking day when you got hard science like this that you don't hear a fucking peep about. Nothing. And that one of the reasons I fucking hate mainstream media is they don't fucking do their job. And, sorry, you can tell there's some veins popping out a little bit, maybe. I'm just so sick of ignoring good science and propping up shitty fucking piece of shit manipulated horseshit science. All right? So don't ever link to me any more fucking epidemiology. This is the kind of science I like here. All right? The kind of science that is hard data with controlled studies. I don't care if they're randomized. One could argue but it's still way better than epidemiology. And interventions, clinical interventions, where they only change one variable and then determine if the outcome's altered. These are the kinds of science. This is the kind of science we should be doing, not trying to justify our own hypothesis with epidemiology and trying to prove our theories with epidemiology. That's fucking horseshit. That's not how it's done. That's not scientific. And anybody claiming to have science on their side that throws fucking epidemiology at you they're just ignorant of how science is done. Epidemiology has one purpose, and it has to be pretty strong. There's pretty, the Bradford Hill fucking criteria is pretty strict on how much a risk has to go up to show an association with something. But even then, they're now starting to be careful about this in these publications. They're saying shit like, it doesn't prove causation, and they somehow, but that's not the headline, you see. That's the fine print at the bottom of the fucking article that most people don't ever fucking get to. They read the headline, maybe the first paragraph, and then they're out. Yep, I'm right, you're wrong. And, I'm sorry. I just wanted to rant a little bit that, I haven't completely abandoned science, but it's hard to find good science nowadays that is not biased, that even if they're surprised by something or proven wrong, and that's one of the reasons I like Tim Noakes, is he reversed his position once he saw the good science. And believe it or not, Jeff Volek and Stephen Phinney, and I don't agree with everything Stephen Phinney says either, because some of the science he does, I do believe he is guilty of this, trying to manipulate it in such a way that it supports his thing, and he's anti-fasting, it seems, at least for longer than 72 hours. So, still take science where it is. A lot of these scientists want to prove their own hypotheses and are reluctant to say they're wrong. And that's one of the things you got to look out for. And I don't know, I've never really seen Jeff Volek being guilty of this bias. Now, I would admit that a lot of the science he's doing is to prove his hypotheses based on his personal, belief in the diet. And what's really cool is, and I want to play this for you at the end, is when Dr. Lustig questions Jeff Volek at the end of this particular talk. It was probably one of I could watch that all day. Can we just get them two in a room and maybe a couple other experts like Stephen Phinney and some of these other motherfuckers and just ask each other questions on the points that they don't diverge on? Or that they diverge on, because Lustig is not a ketogenic low-carb proponent. He's a real food person, and fructose is the demon that caused everything. And I do think he's a little short-sighted in that respect. And I piqued my interest. I wanted him to keep going for another hour once Lustig got up and started asking questions. So we're going to go to that real quick.
So probably everyone in the room has heard about some study that came out this year that showed that a keto diet reduces lifespan by 4 years. And I was shocked because we follow a keto diet in my home. And it was in mainstream media. And I just wondered what you know about that article. And it seems like a lot of the evidence you have is clearly in support of this diet. But I know there's been some recent press around this topic and hoped you could address kind of the other side of the coin on maybe what some of the advocates of a carb-loaded diet would say.
I don't know if I recall the details. It seems to be an epidemiological study.
Yeah. Yep. Do you see that look on his face about the epidemiology, that's spewed out by the fucking press, scaring people away from the diet? That's the same look I get now. Is the epidemiology, so? It's epidemiology. It doesn't prove anything. Duh.
And I don't think any of the people studied in that particular paper were actually on a well-formulated ketogenic diet. So,
yeah, 40% of their nutrition or their calories were coming from carbohydrates, and they called that low calorie, by the way. Yeah, that's the quality of our epidemiology. So not only are they using epidemiology to prove bullshit, they're manipulating it. They're associating low carb as 40%, and that's probably the upper threshold of low carb. And they're associating that with keto, when you're completely in an entirely different metabolic state, when you are taking in 5 to 10% of your caloric intake from carbohydrates. It's a big difference in your metabolism between that and taking in 40% from carbohydrates. You are still a carb burner. You are still on that threshold at 40%. You're not fat adapted. And you won't fat adapt at that level of carbohydrates. It's not going to happen.
I think the media and the headlines were a little beyond the data. Fake news.
I think Dr. Lustig had something to add.
Fake news.
Jeff, I have absolutely no
This is where I was like, oh, I know that voice.
problem with the benefits and the empiric evidence promoting a ketogenic diet. My question is mechanism. I had asked this question of Dr. D'Agostino when he came off the podium. I'm going to ask you as well. How do you know it's the ketones and not the insulin reduction that's making the difference? Every single thing that ketogenic diet does that's beneficial, you can see in an insulin-reduced state as well, including the longevity. So my question is, has anybody parsed those two things? Has anybody done a hyper...
Ooh, I can answer this. Not just because I watched this already. The reason that is because the reduced insulin triggers a process which eventually leads to ketosis. It's kind of, cause and effect there. So in a low insulin environment, once you burn through your liver glycogen, not your muscle glycogen, your liver glycogen, you start to produce more and more ketones. It's a sliding scale. It is a spectrum. Even carb burners go into ketosis a little bit here and there. Very little bit. Mostly at night when they're sleeping. Unless they're waking up to eat and popping gels while they're in the middle of the night or some shit. I don't know. But the fact is I would hope Lustig could have answered his own question here, because if I can get it, and essentially Jeff Volek says the same thing. So it's, these processes are not exclusive of each other. They're related. As you lower insulin, as your glucose comes down, your ketones step up. It's part of the process. And for over a long enough time period, you start to adapt to this state and become more efficient at it. That's what fat adaptation is. When you first start on a ketogenic diet, you're going to be as inefficient as fuck. You're pissing out ketones left and right. As you become more efficient, you start to piss negative, or pretty damn close to negative. Trace is about as low as I've ever pissed. So unless you're using blood ketone meter, you're really not getting an accurate representation of your level of ketosis. But, I was floored when I started. I was like, oh my God, can you just let him ask more questions? Let him keep asking questions, please. Come on.
hyperglycemic, hyperinsulinemic clamp with exogenous ketones, bringing them up to the level that one would see in a ketogenic diet, but maintaining a normal, shall we say, non-ketogenic serum insulin and still seeing those same beneficial effects. Are they dissociable, or do you need both?
Yeah, I don't think, to answer the last part, I don't think...
And also the other part I want to say is I don't believe in exogenous ketones. Let your body do its job. Let's stop trying to fucking buy shit, all right? If you're buying ketones, you're doing it wrong, all right? You shouldn't have to. Your body does all of this. There's no supplements, all right, for the ketogenic diet. The closest thing to a supplement you should be worried about is your electrolytes in the beginning. But over time, that improves. And I'm finding the more I take the vegetables out of the diet, the less often I cramp. Just saying. Cramping is a lot more rare now. I used to cramp every fucking morning when I was eating veg all the time, when I had nuts in my life. Every morning I'd wake up with a massive foot cramp. Sometimes in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, I would get up with a fucking foot cramp. Since I went more carnivore in my life and a lot less veg and a lot less nuts, and nuts haven't even been a part of my diet for a while now, no late night cramps. I have cramped up during exercise, but I drank coffee on the way to the fucking to do my cardio, and I cramped under the bottom of my foot during it, and that's like straight up electrolyte issue right there, because coffee does not hydrate you, it dehydrates you. And I probably might not have taken in enough salt. I didn't eat, I was 24 hours fasted when I did that. There's that.
There's really good data out there where people have tried to parse out the mechanisms, but I agree fully, and I'm convinced the benefits of a ketogenic diet are due primarily to the carb restriction and lower insulin, of which ketosis is one of the effects.
Yeah, it's cause and effect.
And so the
this
way this is playing out is, do you recapitulate the response to a ketogenic diet with exogenous ketones?
And this is
the answer is
extraordinarily,
no.
well, that's extraordinarily important because there are a whole bunch of people selling exogenous ketones and telling you that they're awfully good for you. And
Yeah, those people are shitheads.
I don't know that that's true at all.
No, because, I mean, metabolically, taking exogenous ketones, if anything, would inhibit your ability to burn fat. So you have a completely opposite adaptation there. But we do know also that elevating your ketones does have some direct effects on signaling, on brain metabolism. So some of the effects you might be able to mimic.
Well,
others you're not.
Sure. And one of the big questions is, is it anorexia? Because one thing ketones do is they make you not want to eat.
So I think the
I don't know about what he's talking about, but after 4 years on the ketogenic diet, I can tell you my appetite's on point. There are some days, and since I started, here's another thing I've noticed, since I started exercising, I'm a hungry ass motherfucker now. I want to eat more. My appetite has gone up. My belly measurement's been fairly consistent. I have dipped my toe at 36 inches from 36.25 inches, but I seem to be hovering in that area because I'm not losing weight as I exercise. And I'm allowing myself to eat to satiety whenever I get hungry, not just waiting, for one meal a day or any of these other pretty much calorie restrictive protocols. I eat when my body's like, hey, motherfucker, time to eat. And sometimes I eat when I'm not hungry, out of boredom a little bit. And I allow myself to do that because I'm trying to build muscle, and I acknowledge I could be building fat too at the same time. So if I put on a bunch of fat, that's fine. I can take that back off and keep the muscle, as we've demonstrated, just by increasing my fasting times to reasonable levels. I'm not saying doing tons of long fasts, which I do want to do a response to an article that one of you sent me in the comments about Stephen Finney taking another shit on fasting. But, we need this kind of discourse, more of this. We need these scientists to go at it and debate and go back and forth, because at the very least, it allows you to hear both sides of the argument. It allows you to, and sometimes they learn from each other, and they do it in real time. And I think Lustig will eventually start to see this science and be like, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense. And he's pretty hardcore and very opinionated on his fructose is the demon that kills everything theory. I just wish, it pleases me to see him, watching these lectures to begin with, and in a position, from a position of education where he can get into the mechanisms like this and so on and so forth. And he is not, and he did say he's not taking a shit on the benefits of the ketogenic diet, but he does have concerns, obviously. Which will not allow him to bless or condone or condemn. He's just got some concerns and some questions he wants answered before he weighs in one way or another. And the other thing I wish that Dr. Lustig would explore more is, of course, our fucking pollution in our agricultural system. He's all about real food without really looking into the problems with our real food system. And real is very subjective at this point, thanks to Monsanto and our industrial agriculture and monoculture crops and soil depletion and petroleum fertilized bullshit that's going on. It's hard to even say that vegetables are even healthy and fiber is good for you at this point. And now that most of us pretty much have leaky gut, fiber can cause you a lot of problems because you're essentially allowing these plant toxins, these fucked up bacteria into your bloodstream and wreaking havoc on your autoimmune system. And that's, how do we recover from that? We need more science on the gut microbiome. We need more exploration of leaky gut. It's just not being done. And there's absolutely zero science being done on the carnivore diet. There's nobody doing this level. Jeff Volek is very focused on keto. I don't see any carnivore experiments going on. I hope that it evolves to that point where we try and figure out why so many people are getting so much benefit from these health outcomes when they go fucking full carnivore. You know, and especially the mental health aspect of it. Look at our fucking pharmaceutical industry there. Yeah, they're not going to let that happen anytime soon.
The thing you have to appreciate is ketogenic diets are highly pleiotropic. They are working through a variety of different mechanisms, and I think insulin is definitely a key player. So Gary's right on track. We should be talking about, you know, control of adipocytes and how do you get fat out of there? Well, it's insulin. There's no doubt about it, and that's what drives ketosis and why you can see elevated ketones. But we do understand ketones are doing a lot of things directly now.
What I would say is that we have to figure out which effects are due to the ketones and which effects are due to the insulin reduction.
I hope I just submitted a $10 million proposal to study that. So
I'm not on the study
if anyone
section.
has $10 million, I'll tell you where to write the check.
All right. And that's another problem is funding for this shit. So it is what it is. So I'm running a little over on time here. I do want to go over some Tim Noakes real quick. And some of the things that he discusses. Let's just watch some of this real quick.
And this is what they're ignoring. And the book is about the hyperinsulinemia. And when I hear people talking the cardiology nonsense, and the reason I show you this data is to show you.
So he ignored the fact that he did a study back in his carb loading days that looking at it today, and he didn't realize at the time he was pre-diabetic. And it's for the same reason that a lot of people are undiagnosed with pre-diabetes is we're not checking their insulin levels during a glucose tolerance test. And the fact that they need 4 times as much insulin to keep their blood glucose in a normal range. He was seeing signs of this in this study, and he ignored it. Why? He was young, healthy, running, doing everything right, and carbohydrates are the way. And he has since reversed on this position. And the moment he reversed on this position, because he was so central to this dogma of carbs and athletic performance and nutrition, that they were like, oh shit, we need to completely destroy this motherfucker and shut him the fuck up. So they put his ass on trial, tried to take his medical license, tried to discredit him. And if you haven't watched the Tim Noakes trial, he's got the entire presentation he gave as evidence on his YouTube page, Tim Noakes Foundation. It's like 16 hours or 15 hours of testimony that is like a classic course of nutrition that proves all of these points scientifically. So much so he won his trial. They had an appeal. I think the appeal was still going on when this was filmed, but I do believe they I haven't kept up on where the appeal went, but I see that he's out writing books and speaking again, so who knows how it went. I'm thinking that ultimately they had to shut the fuck up because they got absolutely annihilated on every level. All of their experts that they brought up were just destroyed by his lawyer. And he goes over it in this talk, and you can find the link to this in the description too. This is a pretty good talk by him that summarizes a lot. There's some awkward moments where he's playing like gospel music at the beginning. I'm like, okay, Tim, come on. We're not here for that. We're not here for the spirituality or whatever. We're here for the science and the flashlight that you're shining on our medical and pharmaceutical and food industries.
That I could have diagnosed my type 2 diabetes, my insulin resistance, when I was 28.
And wouldn't it be great if everybody got that diagnosis when they were 28? If you went in for your checkup and you're, this young college kid, or you're even, later into your 20s and you went into your doctor and they were doing an actual test to discover that you were pre-diabetic. Why aren't we doing that now? This is a proven way of diagnosed hyperinsulinemia, which leads to insulin resistance, which leads to diabetes. You can nip diabetes in the bud and catch it before the damage is done. Before your pancreas is fucked. There's science that shows you can regenerate your beta cells in your fucking pancreas if you catch diabetes early enough. Unfortunately, we are waiting until it is too late now. And the best you can hope for in that situation is remission by maintaining a long-term ketogenic diet. And that's the only way you can get out of taking the ever-increasing hamster wheel fucking medications just to keep your blood sugar under control. And eventually your body just continues to spiral out of control till you die. And that's what happened to his father. His father died because they told him to eat carbs after his pancreas was already fucked up to the point where he lost both his legs and had several strokes to where he couldn't talk at the end of his life. Does that sound like how you want to go? Well, turns out if you were vigilant enough and you checked this insulin response and you measured it, that you would know ahead of time how to prevent years of suffering with the eventual end of being diabetic to the point where you're losing limbs, you're having strokes, you're having heart attacks, you're having all of these problems. You're losing your eyesight. And it's avoidable. It's completely avoidable. But we're not even checking it. I to this day, when I get my blood work done, they're not testing my glucose tolerance. They're not giving me a glucose tolerance test and testing my insulin levels. You know, why? Because they see my blood sugar's good. Oh, your blood sugar's fine. We don't have to spend that extra money. We don't have to run that extra test. We're good. Your blood sugar's fine. You're healthy. That's just a symptom. Blood sugar spiraling out of control, you're not going to notice that until it's broke. But there's a cause, a causative effect that you can figure out ahead of time before you cause the damage that leads to diabetes. There's an indicator. And I hate to break it to you, if you're watching this right now and eating the standard American diet, 75% of you motherfuckers are already pre-diabetic with your hyperinsulinemia. As in, your blood sugar's fine, your A1C looks great, you're not diabetic, but you're taking 4 to 8 times the amount of insulin to get that job done. And your pancreas can only do that for so long before it burns out permanently and causes your blood sugar to start rising. And that's the point that we try and slap the drugs on you while giving you the fucking carbohydrate-based, plant-based fucking diet. It's unethical. And we're still doing it right now. Unless you've done your own homework and you go to a doctor that is not doing it. And I suggest if you're diabetic in any way, shape, or form, that should be your approach to treating it. Find a doctor who knows this shit. And you have them come up with a plan for remission. And they're out there. Jason Fung is a good example, though he's more into the fasting side, but he does low carb shit too, where needed.
Not when I was 58. So we did an experiment where we did the reason was we didn't know what post-exercise ketosis, what caused great length. And what we didn't worry about was fat oxidation. It wasn't on the agenda. We completely ignored it.
He's admitting that he didn't pay attention to pretty much the other metabolism that you have, that you're able to perform in terms of exercise. Now, keep in mind, it took people like Jeff Volek and Dr. Finney to bring him around from this. He was so close-minded at the time that he didn't want to even look at this shit. And I believe that is a good example of where our science is in a lot of our nutrition science now. This my theory is the way to go. I don't even want to hear anything else. And I am so happy that he learned and reversed his position, because that gives him a lot of credibility as a scientist. Because a scientist that does this, that ignores the fat part in favor of their own theories, is not doing any justice to nutrition. So, watch this talk. This is a good talk because it covers not only the flaws of science that have been going on forever, but it also covers in great detail the corruption going on and the collusion going on between the food industry and the medical industry. And if it's doing this in South Africa and you think they're not doing it in the United States, then you're being naive. So I don't have time to play it all. I definitely recommend this video in terms of just kind of catching up with Tim Noakes, because, he went off the grid for a little while because he endured so much bullshit from the medical mob and the academic mob and the vegans and the food industry and the shills and the scientists and the doctors who all came for him. And he kicked their fucking ass. And there's no way you can watch that trial like I did. It was fun. It's one of them things I'll rewatch. That's how enjoyable it was to see the industry shills get their ass handed to them in a fucking public court forum. So much so that they're embarrassed by it. And it was the essential of, sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up. That's exactly what I got the impression of from the trial. They got owned in that trial. And it was their own fault. They wanted to destroy him, and he ended up destroying them. That's what happens. Maybe you should, if you don't have good scientific evidence to back up your claim, shutting the fuck up is the next best option. Just saying. So, once again, I'm not a fucking expert. I'm just an asshole. I'm doing this research like all of you. And, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. And this is just one of the things that I wasn't brought to my attention because we didn't have the science yet. And even when we did have the science, I didn't hear about it till now. Because I didn't dig deeply into some of these studies. It's my fault. And I looked at some of these studies and I overlooked this whole glycogen thing. And that's the advantage of watching these talks that step you through some of these studies, that they can put together the pieces that if you're not a scientific motherfucker or an academic motherfucker, you're able to have somebody who is kind of step between you and actually just reading the study, but that by no means is a replacement for you looking at it yourself. So look at these studies. In addition to listening to the people that wrote them talk about them, you should also listen to the people who are disputing the studies. Listen to the people who have different interpretations of the data, because there's more than one way to interpret data. As we saw, as Dr. Lustig was going back and forth a little bit. These are two very scientific people that interpret the data in different ways. And ultimately, what it boils down to is what's your interpretation. So, I'm not a fucking expert. I'm just an asshole. Don't ever take me as an endpoint and do your own homework and shit. I say it all the time. I mean it. This is not the end-all, be-all, my channel. All right? I'm here to share my journey, the things I learned, the experiences, my interpretations and opinions of this data. They could be wrong. They could be right. It's to get you thinking about it, to get you asking the question, to get you telling, hey, motherfucker, you're wrong. I like it when you do that, believe it or not. I try and go back and forth to have that discourse that we saw at the end between two mildly divergent opinions that overall have the same goal of improving public health. And your experience may be different than mine. There may be something you did that is different from what I did that got you good results. And I like hearing that. I like this discussion, this shutting people down that you don't agree with and shouting them down and just talking shit about them all the time, which I see a lot of going on right now in the nutrition community. This is not how you solve these problems. You know, you don't say my way is the only way and it's right. No. Constantly you need to be evaluating whether or not you're 100% right. And I at no time am claiming that I am 100% on cue with nutrition. The only thing I'm 100% certain of that I will not back down from is that the standard American processed food diet and our industrial agriculture is fucked and causing our chronic disease, obesity, in all of these epidemics. Autism, I believe, also falls in that category. These chronic disease epidemics that have sprung up since 1975, the year I was fucking born. And here we are today, and it's not getting any better because we haven't changed a fucking thing in our food environment. You know, as many of us that go keto, you still walk out the door and everybody's eating like shit in all the shitty places, and all you see in stores and restaurants is shit. You don't see good food. You don't see healthy shit. So, you know, that's what to say. So if you found this video enlightening and you want me to keep making this shit or put out more of these kinds of talks too, this is a little experimental where I'm kind of combining what I do on a live stream with what I do in making videos. Please head to ScottTheTruckDriver.com and leave a tip in the virtual fucking tip jar that allows me to spend more time doing this and less time doing other things to produce income to survive upon, and then I can focus more on producing content from the channel and doing the research necessary to find these kinds of things. Because if I don't spend time watching these long ass lectures, sometimes, you know, I watched like 5 hours of lectures yesterday. Because I'm also partially preparing for my podcast on Friday, where I want to go over not only the glyphosate thing, but also our children's health, the next generation coming up. And some of you have already been submitting some things that are interesting in that regard. That I don't even know that I could cram all that in a 2-hour podcast because I get so triggered on it. But, you know, you guys helping me out through the tip jar definitely keeps this going. And for those of you that have been doing that, I appreciate it. And it does matter to me in ways I can't even describe to you. You know, but if you don't want to do that, just like, subscribe, comment, share, whatever you can to do your part to help me grow this channel. And the more it grows, the more time I can spend on it. And I have started the second channel, which is photography, but I have no illusions that that's going to pay my bills or do anything other than being a nice, fun way to share some other aspects of my life and things I do with you, and maybe learn a little bit on that side of things for people, that maybe my journey over there helps somebody make a decision on getting out of busting their ass in corporate slavery their whole life. So I hope you guys purchased the podcast this Friday, and because I don't want to build it up too much, because what if I suck? But I definitely have got a lot of passion in me for the things I want to talk about, and I keep like watching and researching for it and getting so angry, like so upset at how fucked up it is. And it's not changing. And the other reason for that is I'm doing, I'm coaching kids that are riding mountain bikes, and I want so badly to coach them on the nutrition side, and I have to bite my tongue because it's that stepping outside of my bounds. It's not my place to do that. You know, I cannot tell you how to raise your children. But that's not going to stop me from getting upset when I see things that they're eating and drinking that are destroying. It's pulling the rug out from under them before they even get to be 20s. They're having health problems right now. They are struggling right here and now. And I'm telling you that their nutrition is probably the biggest factor in why our kids are more unhealthy than they ever been, and they're even slated to be a generation that their lifespan is lower than ours, the previous generation. So I'm really digging heavily into that right now, because it's a concern. We're not doing anything for our kids. You know, our next generation is going to be even more unhealthy than we were. We're not teaching them these lessons. They're not learning it in school. They're being fed the same crap at school. You know, or they're going plant-based, and then they're miserable because they're not getting all the nutrition they need to grow properly. You know, we can get into that. There's a lot I've kind of kicked around on that subject, even including if you watch this Tim Noakes video, he goes over, because the whole reason he got put on trials, he told a mother to wean her, well, he didn't say it, he said it as a generalization, to wean her baby onto a high-fat, low-carb diet. And it turns out when he said that, it was in line with the nutritional guidelines, who were all scared to death because vegans were putting their kids on vegan diets, and the kids were dying of malnutrition and having all kinds of problems because you don't get the building blocks you need to grow as a kid from a vegan diet. You're not ready for a vegan diet because you haven't even built shit yet to tear down that you're eventually going to tear down if you go vegan. And that's why all of them are like, oh, we can't tell kids to go plant-based. But we can tell adults to, because that's not hypocritical in every fucking way possible. Fuckers. I look forward to that. Follow me on Minds if you want to keep up. Check out ScottTheTruckDriver.com, my blog. I post everything there. I haven't done any off-platform stuff in a while, because mainly I haven't done anything off-platform because I've been focusing pretty heavily on this subject right now, and my other channel where the off-platform stuff's going to be just random vloggy shit, uncut, unedited shit when I do it. So we'll see if anything comes up that I feel I need to put out some off-platform stuff. But make no mistake, I'm still going to post off-platform as kind of a way to motivate people to keep track of ScottTheTruckDriver.com and the stuff I post on Minds.com. So enjoy. And above all else, have a nice motherfucking day. And shit. Now I gotta go pick shit up and put shit down. And picking shit up and putting shit down. And picking shit up and putting shit down. And picking that shit up and putting it fucking down. Turns out I got enough fucking glycogen to do it and shit.